Can you please state your name and date of birth?
My name is Larry Bell, and I was born December the 6th, 1939. Yeah, when I was a little kid, my folks used to come from the San Fernando Valley and bring us to the beach, and Venice was the beach we came to. There was hardly ever anybody out there. It was pretty funky. The further south you get, it was the canals were all filled with cars and washing machines and oily water, and it smelled bad too. It was totally different than the Sherman Oaks where I lived, and Venice was just different people down here. There were black people there, black people and Spanish people and Asian people, Mexican people, and where I lived it was all white and Jews. Venice Beach was fantastic. It was hardly anybody there on the beach. Everybody was up in Santa Monica or down in Hermosa Beach or someplace like that.
So it was fantastic. Why?
Just because it was vacant. Yeah, vacant. And there was no business either, no commerce really, a few stores. There was a drugstore on Windward and Pacific, Val's Drugs. That was sort of the only business around. There was no markets, there was nothing. It was dangerous down there. There was a lot of gangs and motorcycle guys and a lot of, not that the bikers were that dangerous, but they, as a group, they were sort of scary. There was a place called the Venture Inn on Washington Boulevard, which is now James Beach. And the clientels were all bikers and wrestlers, and at least once a week somebody'd get thrown through the plate glass window of the place, you know. I liked the guys, the wrestler guys. They were really funny people. Bikers I wasn't so sure of, but the wrestlers were kicking the ass.
Once you moved past your teen years, you became an artist yourself, and you talked about that this was when you got your first studio in Venice?
Well, I was just thrilled to have a place, a big empty store right next to the beach, you know, for I think $70 a month or something like that. My landlord was a guy named Stan Flinkman, and the family owned a bunch of property around here, including that big apartment up on Main Street, that big building that is so interesting inside and so totally boring outside. It's a little bit like the Bradbury building in downtown LA, but it's right here. Nobody wanted to come down to Venice. It was too dangerous. And so there were old Jewish people, there were synagogues on the boardwalk, and a couple of one or two delis on the boardwalk. Murray's Deli was a place I used to go. Yeah. You weren't allowed to live in a commercial building in those days. At least that's what the law was, you know. And so we were always very careful about not letting strangers come in because they might be city inspectors and tell you to get out, you know. 124 Marine Street, that's what the address was.
Having your first studio in Venice and beginning your art career at that time, how did that influence the art that you were making, being down in Venice and living that environment that you're describing?
Well, that's a great question, because I would tend to say it didn't affect anything, but in fact it did. I moved into what had been some kind of a commercial store. It had a big, like a skylight over the central part of this rectangular room, which was roughly 3,000 square feet. And so there was the architecture of the space was quite clean and empty, and it had a rectangular shaped something on the ceiling which covered a skylight. I didn't realize it until months after I had moved in there that whatever that was actually the covering of a skylight. And I poked a couple of holes in it from a ladder and light came through, and I realized, geez, there's a skylight in here. We took away the what we called beaver board at the time that was covering this thing, and it's profoundly changed the way I work. With nothing in the studio, it was full of light. And that ended up being my media, the interface of light and surface. And I started working in this big room out of the corners of the space, because I didn't want to, I loved the emptiness of it. So I stuck to the walls and the corners and so on, and ended up making things that were walls and corners. And I'm still doing that. There was talk of the Marie Street being redeveloped. As soon as that happened, the rents went up. I moved out because the rent got, I was only paying about $80 a month for my studio that I lived in also. So I moved, I found a little house. I had the upstairs of the house and the little garage, and that's where I started making my first sculptures, really, was in that little brick garage. People were becoming aware of the simple fact that there was no more beachfront stuff. You couldn't just go out and buy yourself an old ruin of a house in Venice canals. When I first moved here, you could buy a house on a lot in the canals for $2,000. The canal was full of washing machines and oil, and it was terrible. But that changed, I mean, all of a sudden everybody realized, my God, this is the last beach of the city of Los Angeles. This is Los Angeles City's official beach. And you could buy it up for nothing, and so fortunately a lot of small people bought up property.
Will you talk a little bit about some of the people that you were starting to work with, like Irwin Sokol?
I got to know Irwin about 20 years after I started staying in that hotel. I came back to Venice. I can't remember what the reason was. From New Mexico, I came back. This was around 1974, and the hotel had just opened, called the Marina Pacific, and that was Irwin's hotel. And he and his wife, he designed it and built it with his own hands, and was the contractor and the designer and the whole thing. And one day, this fellow walks up to me, who I'd seen around. He wanted some help designing the new facade for the hotel and all that stuff. And in fact, all they planned to do was paint everything and put new carpeting and put new furniture in the rooms and stuff like that. And I didn't know who he was, this guy who came up. I'd seen him around. I didn't know it was the owner and the guy who built the place. I suggested what color to paint the building, what color the floors should be, and so on, and or approved what they had designed and stuff like that. And I also gave him a bunch of work to hang in the rooms, thinking maybe I'd sell something out of the hotel, So there's a piece of mine in every room in the hotel still, and there's one of the rooms. He named one of the rooms Larry's Loft, which is a meeting room up on the 5th floor, and I have a sort of an ongoing exhibition. Whenever they want to change it, he calls me and said, "What can you put up there that's different than what's up now?"
And it's even still today.
Yeah, so I take stuff up.
So you've continued that relationship with your art?
Well, it was hard to avoid. He just stopped charging me. I come to the hotel, and that's where I stay, and they park my car, and they, and I got to know everybody who works there. I felt that it was like family, It was, this is, all of a sudden I've been adopted into a Jewish family in that owns the hotel I live in.
Who were some of those artists that you were close to or that you celebrated during that time?
Billy Al Bankston, Ken Price, Robert Irwin, John Altoon.
How do you think you were influenced by those other artists that were around you?
Humor. The one thing everybody had in common was an incredible sense of humor. It's the physical properties of the place, the air, the ocean, are probably the reasons that Venice is fantastic. Nothing else. The rest of the stuff comes and goes, but that stays. I never met anybody that left Venice because they didn't like the weather.
That's